The old jail was what you might imagine as a Western old jail. There was the general housing unit in which all the inmates who didn't get a separate cell were housed, all in one. And there was no deputy in the housing unit. So the biggest and the strongest inmate controlled the dorm.
It's a local jail, so I mean you're going to have all the local petty crimes, you know, and I don't mean to lessen them, but I mean like DUI, domestics, and even back then domestic wasn't even a mandatory arrest, neither was DUI. But we had people in here that committed murder, we had people that committed more than one murder, and we had, you know, drug traffickers. You would get off the elevator with an inmate. If the gate is closed, you would ring the bell or buzzer, and then you would go through here, through this gate, and to the left is your booking area.
You were in a control center with a Royal typewriter and a sergeant who had a big grease board with the housing units listed on there, and when somebody come in, he'd, you know, wipe the grease board off and add 2 instead of 1, you know, number of inmates in your jail.
The booking photo was a 4-plex, basically a camera that shot 4 pictures. And you would clip one to their card, one to their main file, and then the other 2 would be maybe for medical or something else, or sit in the file in case you lost the other ones. Detectives was across the street, and Boynton Lane was patrol, and this was just the jail. But our evidence was downstairs, so you would see detectives and or other patrolmen or somebody booking evidence into evidence downstairs.
The facility could not hold more than 90, so it was rarely at that number. So 72 to 75 within all the housing units that were up there.
The average shift here on Graveyard was only 4 or 5 people and a sergeant, because obviously everything's locked down. During the day watch, you had courts going, you had court transportation, because we were also the bailiff, as well as you're taking them from here to the court, then you had the bailiff in the court. When it was day shift here, it was really, really busy as far as, you know, comings and goings and who needed to see who. And then at the same time, you're doing the feeding, the clothing.
We were also the nurse, so we would roll a cart around and you would administer every imaginable drug that a doctor had prescribed that particular inmate. So it was med call. There were no females in our class. There were matrons, not deputy sheriffs. So females weren't hired for the sheriff's office.
Well, when I first got hired, there was, I'm trying to think of how many female deputies we had. I would say probably less than 20. Of the 300, probably 20. As we started getting closer to 1988 with the new jail, when we started to consolidate, we picked up a lot more females that were working from Reno, were working from Sparks.
In general housing, we had the general inmate. The folks that needed protection from other inmates might have had their own cells. There were big old iron bars. There was a big button at the end of the cell that you'd push a button and the cell would just clank open and then close. And they had a steel bed with a cotton mattress on it and a very small area to move around. There was also a passageway between the jail and the courts. At the time, we would put an inmate that had to go to court in this passageway and lock the doors, and then a deputy on the other side would unlock the doors and they would take the inmate to their hearing. Those doors weren't supposed to be open at the same time. Occasionally they were, and an inmate decided that it was his opportunity to just run.
That hallway, a lot of people thought that led somewhere, and it's like, that leads to the courts, you know.
There were several floors of the court system, so we just continued to run, and then he'd run down some stairs and then run through some offices and eventually outside. But as he was running around, you know, judges were walking by and we were all chasing him, and he could run very, very fast. And we had, you know, our bulletproof vests on and our gun belts, and you know, big heavy shoes. And so finally, I think it was Dave Rossetti, who was very fast, a good runner, finally caught up to him and tackled him and brought him back to the jail. And he was promptly charged with attempting to escape.
They had a murder at the Bally's, the MGM, and it was so far unsolved. It was a cab driver had been murdered. And so I was walking in the back, and at that time he could let the inmates smoke. And so as I walked back there one day, I was giving a guy a smoke, and he goes, "Hey, I need to tell you, I went to court today, and the guy that just got transferred to the detention annex said he shot somebody by the MGM Bally's." And turned out that during that day we found out, obviously we didn't transfer, you know, that many, and of those people, he was in here originally, I think, for DUI. And so with that, I called Reno, and I talked to them and said, "Hey, I got a guy up here, says this guy admitting to shooting somebody over there." Sure enough, turned out to be him.
The federal government did not believe that our current housing of inmates was constitutional, that it created too many opportunities for inmates not to be well served, protected under the 8th Amendment. So the federal government said, you will build a new facility whether you have the money or not.
With all the different programs they have, diversion programs that actually come to the jail, whether it be DUI or just general counseling for domestic, or even the diversion programs for the mentally ill. I mean, we have a whole unit now where a lot of times when we were first here, there wasn't a lot of help.
We learned over time that direct supervision, how we built the jail that we are currently in, how it was more important for us to be in there, to influence inmates, to participate in their recovery, and to ensure that their experience there was as moral and ethical as humanly possible for any jail to have.